Good afternoon, students. In the last period, we started second lesson from geography, the sun, the moon, and the earth. Now, first, I revised the topic that we studied in the last period. The first point we studied in the last period, motions of the moon. There are two motions of the moon, axial motion of the moon and the orbital motion of the moon. When the moon rotates, spins around its own axis, that motion of the moon is called the axial motion of the moon. And when the moon revolves around the earth in its own orbit, that motion of the moon is called as orbital motion of the moon. Second point that we studied in the last period was the positions of the moon, perigee position of the moon and the apogee position of the moon. Perigee position of the moon is when the moon is at its closest from the earth. That position of moon is called as perigee position of the moon. And when the moon is at the farthest from the earth in its own revolutionary orbit, it is called as apogee position of the moon. Next point that we studied was waxing and waning moon. You have studied in fifth standard phases of the moon. In the sky at night time, every day we see that the shape of the moon goes on changing from new moon to full moon day. That time period of 15 days, the shape of the moon goes on increasing, and that is called as waxing moon. That period is called as waxing moon. And from full moon day to the new moon day, the shape of the moon goes on decreasing, and that is called as waning moon. So waxing and waning moon, that point we also studied phases of the moon under that topic. Now, next we studied angles made by the earth, moon and the sun. That figure 2.3. In the figure 2.3, we studied the angles made by the earth, moon and sun. Page number 4. You see in this figure, the angles are given. We see the phases of the moon in the sky from the earth. They are actually the illuminated portion of the moon. Thus, you know that the moon is getting light from the sun, and the moon is reflecting lightly received by received from the moon. The moon is reflecting the light it receives from the sun, and they become visible due to the sunlight reflected by the moon. And while revolving around the earth, the moon is on the opposite side of the sun on a full moon day. You can see in the figure. On a full moon day, the moon is on the opposite side of the sun, and on new moon day, the moon is in between the sun and the earth. Now, on the first and the third quarter days, we find that the moon is making angle of 90 degree. It is perpendicular to the sun and the earth. On the first and the third quarter days, the moon, the earth and the sun, they are making an angle of 90 degrees. But on new moon day, the moon is in between the sun and the earth. On full moon day, the moon is opposite to the sun. Now, at these positions, we see half the part of illuminated moon, and hence in the sky it appears semicircular in shape on quarter days. First quarter and the last quarter day, the moon is making an angle of 90 degree with the sun, moon and the earth, and that is why it appears semicircular. We see half part of the moon in the sky. That we studied in the previous chapter, previous period. Now we are going towards the next topic, and that topic is eclipses. Eclipses are actually shadows in the space, shadows in the sky. Uh, you know that the sun and the moon, they are they don't have their own light. They are receiving the light from the sun. Moon is receiving the light from the sun and it is reflecting the light that it receives from the sun. Now we are going to understand what is meant by eclipse. You see the figure 2.3. Now we are going towards figure 2.4. Angles between the faces of the moon. Angles between the planes of orbits. Angles between the planes of orbits. Orbit of moon and orbit of the earth. Now the orbital path of the earth. You see figure 2.4. Angles between the planes of orbits. The orbital path of the moon and the orbital path of the earth, they are not in the same plane. Orbital path of the earth and orbital path of the moon are not in the same plane, and the moon's orbit makes an angle of 5 degrees. Moon's orbit makes an angle of 5 degrees with that orbit of the earth, and hence the moon intersects the earth's orbit 2 times during one revolution. The moon intersects the earth's orbit 2 times during one revolution. On new moon day, the you see figure again, you refer the figure 2.3. In this figure you see on new moon day, on each new moon day, the sun, the moon, the moon and the earth, they are making an angle of 0 degree. The sun, moon and the earth, they are in straight line and they are making an angle of 0 degree. While on full moon day, the sun, the earth and the moon, they are making an angle of 180 degrees. Even so, the sun, the moon and the earth, they may not be in one straight line and in one same place. Hence, eclipses do not occur on every new moon day or every full moon day. However, sometimes the 3 celestial bodies, the sun, the moon and the earth, they come in one straight line and in same plane. On these occasions, eclipses occur. And the eclipses may be solar eclipse or lunar eclipse. Now we are going towards solar eclipse. See figure 2.5. There are 2 types of eclipses, solar eclipse and lunar eclipse. Now see this figure 2.5. When the sun, the moon and the earth, all these 3 celestial bodies, they come in one straight line and in same plane on new moon day. At that time, the light of the sun falls on the moon and the moon's shadow falls on the earth. The moon is coming in between the sun and the earth, and the moon's shadow falls on the earth. Now, in such situations, when these 3 celestial bodies are in one straight line and in same plane, and this condition is on new moon, at that time the shadow of the moon falls on the earth. Now moon's shadow is of 2 types, dark shadow and lighter shadow. When the on such occasions, when the moon's shadow falls on the earth, solar eclipse occurs. In the region of the earth where the dark shadow of the moon falls, from there the sun becomes completely invisible, and this condition is known as total solar eclipse. And the places, the region on the earth where the light of the moon falls, from there the sun is partially seen. The sun can be partially seen, and this situation is called as, this condition is called as partial solar eclipse. So there are two types of solar eclipse: total solar eclipse and partial solar eclipse. Total solar eclipse can be seen from a very limited region. You can see in the figure here, total solar eclipse. Here the sun is completely, the sun becomes completely invisible, and the partial solar eclipse, here the sun is partially visible. We can see that sun is partially covered. Now the next type of solar eclipse is annular solar eclipse. Sometimes the moon is in its apogee position. Sometimes the moon is in its apogee position. It is at farthest from the earth, and at that time the shadow of the moon, it falls in the space. It does not reach the earth, and from a very small area on the earth, from a very small area of the earth, the illuminated part of the sun disk can be seen in the form of a ring, and that condition is called as annular solar eclipse. That condition is called as annular solar eclipse, and annular solar eclipse is a rare phenomenon. It is annular solar eclipse takes place on very rare occasions. Now we have studied three types of solar eclipses: total solar eclipse, partial solar eclipse, and annular solar eclipse. Now we are going towards lunar eclipse. You are going to complete the activity given on page number 5. This activity is about solar eclipse activity. The instructions are given: take a ball of clay or mud and keep it on the center of a table. Fix a pencil vertically in the clay ball in such a way that its sharp end points upwards. Fix a small plastic or sponge ball on the sharp end of the pencil. Draw a circle along the midline of the ball. Let this ball be your moon. Now place a large plastic or rubber ball at distance of 10 to 15 centimeter from this moon. Let the larger ball be the earth. Draw a circle along the midline of this ball using a pencil in the center. Let this be the equator. Keep the ball steady using a rubber or cloth ring. Arrange the balls representing the earth and the moon in such a way that the circle drawn on the moon will be in the plane of the equator of the earth. Now take a torch, hold it at a distance of about 30 centimeters from the moon. Direct the light beam on the moon. Observe the shadow of the smallest ball on the earth to understand how solar eclipse occurs. So that activity you can conduct at home, and you can try yourself how the solar eclipse takes place. I have already sent a video on our WhatsApp group. Now lunar eclipse, next type of eclipse is lunar eclipse. Now figure 2.9, it is about figure 2.8, you refer to the figure 2.8. On a full moon day, the three celestial bodies, the sun, the earth and the moon, they are coming in one straight line, and they are in same plane. At that time the moon enters the dark shadow of the earth in its orbit of revolution. On a full moon day, the three celestial bodies, the sun, the earth and the moon, they come in one straight line and in same plane, and the moon enters the dark shadow of the earth. And when the moon is in the complete moon is in the dark shadow of the earth, at that time we see total solar eclipse. And when the part of the moon is in the dark shadow of the earth, we see partial uh, partial lunar eclipse. When the complete moon is under the dark shadow of the earth, we see total lunar eclipse. And when the part of the moon is seen under the dark shadow of the earth, we see partial lunar eclipse. So there are two types of lunar eclipse: total lunar eclipse and partial lunar eclipse. You are going to remember that the solar eclipse occurs when the moon enters the shadow of the earth, when the moon enters the shadow of the sun, and lunar eclipse occurs when the moon enters the shadow of the earth. Solar eclipse takes place on new moon day and lunar eclipse takes place on full moon day. Okay, so you draw these diagrams into your notebook and study these diagrams, then you will understand the concepts of solar eclipse, the types of solar eclipse and types of lunar eclipse. Thank you.